Totalitarian regimes have a habit of portraying themselves as monolithic yet well-oiled machines, churning out astounding achievements in the fields of science, engineering, and military technology. In that respect, the Soviet Union during the Cold War era was no different, seeking to impress the capitalist world with its wondrous industrial development, its aerospace conquests, and its armaments program. But totalitarian regimes also have the habit of pulling the most embarrassing foobar snafus, oopsies, whatever you like to call them, they will pull them. In that respect, the Soviet Union during the Cold War was no different. Nuclear meltdowns, ill-conceived military vehicles, badly timed purges of key military or medical personnel. Most of those incidents were tragedies that left a trail of death, illness, and despair in their wake. As such, they are no laughing matter, but today we can allow ourselves a quantum of levity, as we're going to discuss possibly the only Soviet cock-up that ended up creating a tourist attraction, one of the most wondrous and downright bizarre on the planet. This is the story of the Darvaza gas crater in Turkmenistan, also known as the Gates of Hell. This peculiar location is also known as the Door to Hell, or any other variation on that theme. As the name suggests, it is a large crater perpetually burning with insanely hot flames, which may rise as high as 15 meters into the air. The fiery gate is roughly 70 meters in diameter and 30 meters deep, meaning that it could easily contain 3 times the US Capitol Rotunda or be filled with the contents of 45 Olympic swimming pools. But even that amount of water would not be enough to put out the flames, as we shall discover later. The crater is located in the middle of the vast and inhospitable Karakum Desert. So vast, in fact, that it takes up some 70% of Turkmenistan's entire surface area, and so inhospitable that temperatures can soar to more than 50 degrees Celsius in summer and plummet below freezing during winter nights. As you may imagine, the Door to Hell is in a pretty isolated location, with the closest village, Dervazi, counting just about 2,000 inhabitants. If you're looking for a more lively urban centre with a few more people around, then you'll have to travel to Turkmenistan's capital, Ashgabat, some 270 kilometers of bumpy desert road to the south. Now, the Karakum Desert might make for a hot and hostile environment, sure, but it's just a puny amateur compared to what goes on within the crater itself. Temperatures inside this pit of raging flames can reach up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is more than 500 degrees hotter than the average temperature on Venus. Even standing close to the edge of the circular inferno is an uncomfortable experience, similar to being exposed to overwhelming blasts of incinerating heat. Those who have visited Darvaza phenomenon have described it as an eerie, unsettling spectacle, especially at night when the flames permeate the surrounding darkness with a deep orange-red glow, accompanied by the roar of a fire that refuses to die. Many visitors have described the vision of the crater at night as a portal to another dimension or a gateway to some planet devastated by an apocalyptic event. More often than not, visitors draw comparisons with infernal imagery and liken the crater to the entrance to the first circles of hell or to some sort of demonic cauldron in which Satan's minions stir the souls of the damned. Alternatively, the pit can evoke the image of a gigantic dragon's mouth smouldering and searing with flames. But if you're not inclined to such dramatic descriptions, you may as well compare the Darvaza crater to some sort of gargantuan hob or stove, which somebody forgot to turn down. The fire is still on and is now desperately begging for someone to cook a giant cauldron of chakdurme, a mouth-watering local dish of rice meat and tomato sautéed onions, by the way. It'd be a bit of a feast. However anticlimactic, the stove comparison would be rather appropriate, as the supposedly hellish flames are being fed by a constant flow of very mundane methane gas. Turkmenistan, in fact, has the world's 6th largest reserves of natural gas, with much of it sitting beneath the Karakum Desert. And the area in which the Darvaza crater is found is right in the middle of the Ziegli-Dervazi group of gas fields. It was this abundance of natural resources and the desire to exploit them which eventually gave origin to the endless flames of Darvaza. We're sure that there is a parallel universe in which the Soviet and Western Bloc countries did not engage in a nuclear arms race, but rather invested their efforts in wizardry and necromancy. And we like to think that in that universe, a coven of Russian and Turkmen warlocks opened a gateway to hell to summon legions of demons for a final showdown with the forces of capitalism. But the origin story of the burning pit of Karakum is far more prosaic, being the result of a Soviet engineering mishap, as we hinted to earlier. We have to rewind the calendar back to 1971, or perhaps even back to 1963, according to different accounts. Turkmenistan was still a part of the USSR, and a team of Soviet geologists was sent by the Ministry of Petroleum Industry to prospect the Ziegli-Devezi gas fields. The squad set up a large drilling rig in the area with the intention of boring into the desert floor and revealing some valuable pockets of natural gas. Unfortunately, they set up their heavy rig above a cavernous void which interrupted the otherwise solid limestone foundations of the desert. The ground thus trembled and cracked before swallowing the rig and revealing a deep chasm underneath. The geologists had pulled a relatively costly oopsie. They had lost some precious drilling equipment, after all. But soon they realized that their mistake could have so much more costlier consequences. The crater they'd just revealed happened to be connected with an enormous reservoir of methane gas, which was now free to pollute the surrounding air, creating an environmental hazard. According to the energy consultancy Captario, quote, methane is up to 83 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And that motivated the geologists to enact a, quote, shrewd and environmentally advantageous move. The prospectors thus set the methane leak on fire, hoping that the ignited gas would burn for a few weeks. Once the flames inside the crater ran out of fuel, the team had all the best intentions to further explore the methane reservoir and exploit it to the benefit of the Ministry of the Petroleum Industry. This origin story was partially contradicted by Greek-Canadian explorer, broadcaster, and storm chaser George Kourounis, who visited the site in 2013 and spoke to local Turkmen geologists. According to them, the Soviet geologists did cause the collapse and opening of the chasm in 1963, but the spewing methane was lit on fire only sometime in the 1980s. Ultimately, there are no official records on the overall incident, which means there is no definitive version. But all accounts agree on the fact that geology experts, either local or sent from Moscow, had wildly underestimated the volume of gas trapped below the desert. The flames did not extinguish in a matter of weeks, but rather kept on burning for months, eventually years. The Cold War occasionally flared up in localized conflicts or tense standoffs, while the gates of hell in the Karakum still burned consistently hotter and hotter. Soviet authorities in Moscow were otherwise preoccupied with their continuous efforts to uphold communist ideology against a capitalist West, and understandably, they had bigger fish to fry than solving the issue of putting out a fire in a crater. This spectacular memento of a prospecting expedition gone wrong gradually fell into oblivion, known only to the inhabitants of the local villages. They knew the giant campfire was born out of some sort of industrial project, but the details had been lost to time and the maze-like bureaucracy of a secretive state. Eventually, the Soviet giant disintegrated as its components sought to detach themselves from Moscow. Turkmenistan was no exception and declared independence on October the 27th, 1991. The fires in the desert kept on scorching the air while the outside world had absolutely no idea that such a phenomenon even existed. Since declaring independence, Turkmenistan has been ruled by only 3 presidents. Sapar Ahmad Nazov from 1991 to 2006, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow from 2006 until March 2022, and most recently his son Serdar. The country has been described as a secretive and totalitarian dictatorship shaped by the cult of personality and the frankly puzzling decrees enacted by its first ruler, Nazov. The self-appointed Turkmenbasi, or leader of the Turkmen, placed a strict veto on ballet and opera, forbade beards and long hair, and imposed his autobiography, or the Ruhnama, or Book of the Soul, as mandatory reading to obtain a driver's license. During the Turkmenbasi era, very little was known about Turkmenistan, and the country was far from being a tourist hotspot. But President Berdimuhamedow gradually opened up the country, and government officials realized that the Devasa crater, once considered just the puzzling relic of Soviet industrial clumsiness, could actually become an attraction for adventurous travelers. Local travel agencies started marketing the Gates of Hell experience to foreign visitors, including it as an extra day on guided tours of the capital city. By extending a trip to Ashgabat by some 24 hours, it became possible to drive across the desert, set up camp by the fiery pit at sunset, and enjoy the otherworldly sight of the ring of fire glowing red in the vast darkness of the Karakum. Tour guides would also offer to cook a typical Turkmen barbecue, not over the door to hell itself, mind you, at a safe distance. In fact, all travel brochures specify that visitors should only spend a few minutes by the crater, as there is a danger of inhaling noxious fumes. The crater's popularity slowly but gradually increased, attracting the attention of travel bloggers and trending on social media. But it would take much more for the door to hell to become a proper global phenomenon. The flames of popularity were first fanned in 2010, when the then president of Turkmenistan, Berdi Muhammadov, paid an official visit to the crater. The leader did not care much for the Darvaza pit and in fact openly described it as an inconvenient nuisance, an environmental hazard and an economic liability. Furthermore, he voiced his desire for the flames to be put out for good. His tirade and his plans to seal shut the entrance to hell had the unintended consequence of further raising the crater's profile until it came into the crosshairs of the aforementioned explorer George Kourounis and microbiologist Dr. Stephen Green. In 2011, with funding from National Geographic and travel company Kensington Tours, the duo started organizing an expedition to the crater. More precisely and more insanely, to the very bottom of the pit, perhaps the hottest and most inhospitable location on Earth, barring active volcanoes, of course. Their mission would be to collect samples of the soil at the crater's bottom and look for evidence of extremophile bacteria. In other words, unicellular organisms that are able to thrive in the most extreme environments. And if such tiny monsters can survive in hell on Earth itself, similar critters could be found on extrasolar planets. In Kourounis' words, quote, "There are planets that have been discovered outside of our solar system that have a very hot, methane-rich environment, kind of similar to what is in the crater. So in essence, we were looking for alien life right here on Earth." After grappling with Turkmen bureaucracy for 2 years, the expedition finally reached the door to hell in November 2013. Before descending into the 1,000-degree inferno, Kourounis donned his otherworldly protective gear, including a heat-resistant suit in aluminized fabric, a breathing apparatus, and a climbing harness made of Kevlar. Even so, the explorer admitted to suffering extreme heat. Quoting him, "I did feel a bit like a baked potato in there." Nonetheless, the indomitable Kourounis rappelled down into the fiery mouth of the pit, providing the only account of experiencing the crater from within. Quote, "I described it as a coliseum of fire. Just everywhere you look, it's thousands of these small fires. The sound always like that of a jet engine, this roaring, high-pressure gas-burning sound. And there's no smoke. It burns very cleanly, so there's nothing to obscure your view." The explorer completed the mission, collecting samples which were later analysed by Dr. Green. Astonishingly, the microbiologist did discover some extremophile bacteria present in the soil, which he described as being enriched by the crater's high temperatures and low nutrient levels. And that fact alone is way more terrifying than a perpetually burning coliseum of fire. But Kourounis' expedition did not scare off visitors. On the contrary, his adventure raised awareness of the pit of Karakum around the world, and his photos amidst the flames went viral. The door to hell had finally made it to the big leagues of extreme and bizarre tourist destinations, and the first TripAdvisor reviews would soon follow. Commenters on the popular review website generally agree that Darvaza gas crater is well worth visiting despite the lack of hospitality infrastructure and the hassle of traversing the desert from Ashgabat. Among the many positive reviews, we singled out an account posted in June 2019 by American recording artist Van Pimpenstein. Darvaza is like no other tourist attraction. We were in Ashgabat prepping to play a Van Pimpenstein concert for a US embassy function when my bandmates and I heard about the infamous gas crater. We decided it was a must-see. The crater itself is enormous and makes for some incredible photo opportunities. Me and our bass player, Richard Texas, put on an impromptu performance for another visiting tourist group that was visiting the site. Van Pimpenstein's improvised concert by the rim of the crater must have been quite the sight, but it surely paled in comparison to the second official visit of President Berdi Muhammadov on August 7th, 2019. The absolute leader had disappeared from public view since July 15th, the date of his last TV appearance. On that occasion, the president and his grandson had given Van Pimpenstein a run for their money as they performed together a rap song dedicated to Turkmenistan's natural beauty. The clip is worth watching as the 62-year-old autocrat showcases some serious drum machine and keyboard skills. But following that performance, the president was nowhere to be seen, fueling speculation that he had actually died. Perhaps to put those rumours to rest, he resurfaced in what must have been the raddest stunt pulled by a head of state in the 21st century. In another clip released by Turkmenistan State TV, the president could be seen aggressively driving a rally car around the door to hell, performing donuts on the brink of the fiery pit, and drifting on the Karakum sands like a proud member of the Toretto family. The race car driving president must have had something of a love-hate relationship with the Darvaza crater. Surely it had great pulling power for international tourists, and surely it made for a great backdrop to announce that he wasn't dead. But at the same time, the leader realized that the crater still posed an environmental hazard, besides burning millions of cubic meters of valuable methane gas. In January 2022, he voiced again his intention to snuff out the gates of hell for good, announcing on TV that, quote, "We are losing valuable natural resources for which we could get significant profits and use them for improving the well-being of our people." His cabinet put forward 3 potential solutions to finally shut down the massive desert hob. First, one could fill the crater with sand or clay. That would make for a simple and relatively cheap solution, but it carries the risk of triggering a massive explosion. Or how about placing a sealed, heat-resistant shell over the mouth of the crater? That would work, but it would be outrageously expensive. Another was to trigger a series of controlled explosions to cause a collapse of the crater's walls, but this solution could actually just open more craters. The most viable option, proposed by state-run agency Turkmenistan, was to drill new wells around the crater so as to starve out the flames by redirecting the gas elsewhere. The president sat on those options for a couple of months before stepping down from power and being replaced by his son Serdar in March 2022. Which may give the impression that the anguish over what to do with that blessed crater finally pushed him over the edge and into retirement. But obviously, Turkmen politics are a much more complicated affair, and the country has been defined as an all-pervasive kleptocracy, ruled by a tyranny mutating into dynasty. The previous president had been grooming his son for succession for years, having him appointed deputy prime minister. Probably due to health issues, Gurbanguly decided it was time to engineer the handover to Serdar, who took power after securing an absolutely not suspicious 72.97% of the votes. Since taking the top job, it appears that Serdar has tackled once again the, burning door to hell. According to the 2024 report by the energy consultancy group Captario, agency Turkmengas did manage to drill a bypass well next to the crater without causing accidental collapses. The effects of the bypass have been captured by satellite imagery, as reported by Captario, quote, "Independent satellite data now confirms a significant drop in emissions, highlighting the success of Turkmenistan's efforts to reduce gas flaring, venting, and leaking." Depending on which origin story you choose to believe, the flames of the door to hell were ignited by a volatile combination of Soviet incompetence and a sincere yet clumsy attempt to mitigate an environmental disaster. Since then, they've been burning incessantly for anything up to 62 years, first ignored by the world and later admired as a wondrous anomaly. Much like the mythical dragon, the Darvaza gas crater was sitting atop a giant hoard of riches, not gold and jewels of course, but a massive reservoir of natural gas which unfortunately is very likely to enrich only Turkmenistan's kleptocratic elite. And much like a mythical dragon, at the end of a legendary tale, it appears that the crater may soon exhale its last fiery breath. Thank you for watching.